They called him the hangman of Cook County, not because he sentenced men to death, but because he strangled the truth before a trial even began. Judge Bianca Halloway didn't just preside over his courtroom, he ruled it like a king, playing a twisted game called Truth or Lie with the lives of the innocent. But on a freezing Tuesday in November, the hangman made a fatal mistake. He tried to play his game with a young black girl named Tiana Williams, thinking she was just another helpless statistic from the South Side. He didn't know he was staring at a legal prodigy with an IQ higher than Einstein's, and by the time he realized the trap wasn't for her, but for him, it was already too late. The air in courtroom 402 was always 10 degrees colder than the rest of the building. Some said it was the draft from the old vents of the Cook County Criminal Courthouse. Others, the regulars who sat in the back rows clutching rosaries, said it was the presence of Judge Bianca P. Halloway. Halloway was a man carved from granite and old money. He sat high upon his bench, his silver hair swept back in a perfect, untouchable wave, his eyes hidden behind rimless spectacles that caught the fluorescent light, turning his gaze into two blank, white discs. He didn't look at defendants. He looked through them. To him, the people paraded before his bench in orange jumpsuits or cheap, ill-fitting suits were not citizens presumed innocent. They were pests, problems to be solved, trash to be taken out. But Halloway was bored. After 20 years on the bench, the law had lost its flavor. So, to keep himself entertained, he had invented a game. He called it Truth or Lie. It wasn't official procedure, of course. It was a character assessment, as he liked to tell the nervous public defenders. Before setting bail or hearing a plea, Halloway would lean over the bench, clasp his manicured hands, and ask the defendant a single, often invasive question. If he believed their answer, if he deemed it the truth, he was lenient. But if he decided, based on nothing but his own prejudice and gut instinct, that they were lying, he would bring the hammer down with the force of a god. "Next case," the bailiff droned, his voice flat. "State of Illinois versus Jerome Baker. Possession with intent to distribute." Jerome, a skinny 19-year-old in a frantic state of trembling, shuffled to the podium. He looked like he might faint. His public defender, a harried woman named Mrs. Clian, who smelled of stale coffee and defeat, began to speak. "Your Honor, my client has no prior—" Halloway raised a single finger. Silence slammed into the room instantly. "Mr. Baker," Halloway said, his voice smooth like oil on asphalt. "Look at me." Jerome looked up, his eyes wide and watery. "Truth or lie?" Halloway whispered into the microphone. "Did you know the drugs were in the car?" The courtroom held its breath. This was the trap. If Jerome said yes, he confessed to a felony. If he said no, he risked the judge calling him a liar. I didn't, Your Honor," Jerome stammered, his voice cracking. "It was my cousin's car. I was just catching a ride to work at the auto shop on Halstead." Halloway stared at him. 5 seconds. 10. The silence stretched until it was physically painful. Halloway smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Work," Halloway repeated, tasting the word like sour milk. "You have a job?" "Yes, sir. AutoZone." "Lie," Halloway barked, the sudden volume making Jerome jump. "You have the look of a boy who hasn't worked an honest day in his life. You're lying to my face in my house." "But I have my pay stub," Jerome cried out, reaching for his pocket. "Bail denied." Halloway slammed the gavel. "Remanded to Cook County Jail until trial. Get him out of my sight." "No, please," Jerome screamed as the bailiffs grabbed him. "I'm telling the truth." The heavy oak doors swung shut, swallowing Jerome's pleas. Halloway adjusted his glasses, a smug satisfaction settling over his face. He didn't care if the boy had a job or not. He cared that he felt powerful. Next. Holloway yawned. The bailiff looked at his clipboard, paused, and then frowned. State versus Tiana Williams, grand larceny and corporate espionage. Holloway's eyebrows shot up. Corporate espionage? In my courtroom? He chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. Bring her in. The doors opened, and Tiana Williams walked in. She was not what anyone expected. Given the charges, stealing proprietary algorithms from a multi-billion-dollar tech firm, the court expected a slick hacker in a suit, or perhaps a disheveled genius type. Tiana looked like a girl who had just rolled out of bed in a dorm room. She was small, with dark skin that seemed to absorb the harsh courtroom lights, and large, expressive eyes that were currently fixed on the floor. She wore a faded grey hoodie that said Howard University in peeling letters, baggy jeans, and scuffed sneakers. Her hair was pulled back in a messy puff, and she clutched a battered leather notebook to her chest like a shield. A ripple of laughter went through the gallery. This girl? A corporate spy? She looked like she got carded, trying to buy a lottery ticket. Docket number 4492B, the prosecutor announced. This wasn't the usual overworked state attorney. This was David Caldwell, a shark in a $3,000 suit hired specially by the plaintiff, blowing into the state court like a hurricane. Your Honor, the defendant is accused of bypassing the firewalls of Veritech Systems and exfiltrating over 4 terabytes of sensitive data, valued at $50 million. Holloway looked down at Tiana, his lip curling in amusement. This child? She's 24, Your Honor, Caldwell said, smoothing his silk tie. Though I admit the sophistication of the crime does not match the appearance of the defendant. I see, Holloway said. He leaned back, the leather of his chair creaking. And where is her counsel? Tiana looked up. Her voice was quiet, barely a whisper. I am representing myself, Your Honor. The courtroom erupted. The bailiff scoffed. Even Caldwell covered a laugh with a cough. Representing yourself, pro se, in a felony case was suicide. In Holloway's court, it was a guarantee of maximum sentencing. Pro se, Holloway smiled. It was the smile of a wolf watching a rabbit limp into its den. Miss Williams, do you understand that you are facing up to 30 years in prison? Do you understand the complexity of these charges? I do, Tiana said. Her voice remained steady, though her hands gripped the notebook tighter. And you think, Holloway continued, mocking her tone, that a little girl from... He glanced at her file. Englewood can go toe-to-toe with Mr. Caldwell? He went to Harvard, Miss Williams. Where did you go? The School of Hard Knocks? Tiana didn't answer immediately. She adjusted her glasses, thick black frames that were slightly crooked. I understand the law, Your Honor. She understands the law, Holloway announced to the room, garnering a wave of sycophantic laughter from the clerks and officers. Well, isn't that precious? He leaned forward, his face darkening. The game was about to begin. He needed to break her. He needed to show this little girl that she didn't belong in the world of high-stakes law. She belonged in a cell or sweeping floors. Well then, Miss Williams, Holloway said, his voice dropping to that dangerous whisper. Before we discuss bail, let's play a little game. I like to get to know the real defendant. Caldwell smirked from the prosecution table. He knew Holloway's reputation. This was over before it started. Truth or lie, Holloway said. Tiana stood still. She didn't tremble like Jerome. She just watched him. Her eyes, previously doe-like and fearful, seemed to sharpen, just for a fraction of a second, before returning to a look of confusion. I don't understand, she said softly. It's simple, Holloway purred. I ask, you answer. I judge. Truth or lie. He scanned her file, looking for something embarrassing. something painful. He found it on the second page, a reference to a foster home record from 10 years ago. "Tell me, Tiana," Halloway said, using her first name to belittle her. "You claim to be a freelance coder on your arrest sheet. But looking at you, hoodie, sneakers, straight out of the projects, it doesn't add up." He paused for dramatic effect. "Truth or lie, did you actually write the code found on your laptop, or did you steal it from a boyfriend who was smart enough to do the work for you?" The question was sexist, racist, and completely irrelevant to the bail hearing. It was designed to humiliate her. Tiana looked down at her notebook. She took a slow breath. When she looked up, her expression had changed. The fear was gone. In its place was a cold, mathematical calm. "I wrote it," she said. Halloway laughed. "Lie! Look at you. You can barely dress yourself for court, let alone engineer a polymorphic encryption algorithm. You're covering for someone. A gang member, perhaps? Someone who used you as a mule?" "I wrote it," Tiana repeated, her voice slightly louder. "And, Your Honor, with all due respect, my wardrobe has no bearing on my cognitive abilities." The room went silent. You did not talk back to Halloway. Halloway's face turned a shade of plum. "Excuse me?" "I said," Tiana continued, her voice gaining a strange, rhythmic confidence, "that asking me about my boyfriend is a violation of the Illinois Code of Judicial Conduct, Canon 2, Rule 2.3, which prohibits a judge from manifesting bias or prejudice based on race, sex, or socio-economic status." Caldwell stopped smiling. He turned his head slowly to look at the girl. Halloway froze. He blinked. You dare cite canon law to me?" "I'm not citing canon law, Your Honor. That would be ecclesiastical," Tiana said, her tone polite but laced with a hidden venom. "I am citing the Illinois Supreme Court rules on judicial ethics, and since we are playing truth or lie..." She took a step forward. "Truth or lie, Your Honor. Did you actually read my file, or did you just look at my zip code and decide I was guilty?" Gasps rippled through the courtroom like a shockwave. The court reporter stopped typing, her mouth hanging open. The bailiff's hand drifted instinctively toward his taser, uncertain of what to do. No one spoke to Judge Bianca Halloway like that. Halloway sat stunned, his mouth slightly agape. For a moment, his brain couldn't process the input. The girl in the hoodie, the thug. She had spoken with the precision of a seasoned litigator. Then the rage set in. "You insolent little..." Halloway spluttered, slamming his hand on the desk. "I should hold you in contempt right now. I should throw you in a hole so deep they'll have to pipe in sunlight." "You could," Tiana said, opening her battered notebook. She flipped a page. "But under Illinois v. Johnson, summary contempt requires an immediate threat to the administration of justice. Responding to a judge's non-procedural, personal inquiry during a bail hearing hardly qualifies. In fact, if you hold me in contempt for answering a question you asked, it would likely be grounds for an immediate mistrial and a recusal motion." She looked up over her glasses. "Shall I file the motion now? I have it drafted." She pulled a folded document from her notebook and placed it on the defense table. It wasn't handwritten scrawl. It was a perfectly typed, properly formatted legal motion. Prosecutor Caldwell stood up, his expensive chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Your Honor, the defendant is clearly more prepared than anticipated. However, her disrespect..." "I am not being disrespectful, Mr. Caldwell," Tiana cut him off, not even looking at him. "I'm establishing the record. The judge initiated a game of truth or lie, which is not found in the Code of Criminal Procedure. I am merely participating." Halloway's face was now a deep, dangerous red. He realized he had walked into something. He didn't know what, but he knew he couldn't let a 24-year-old girl beat him in his own courtroom. He had to crush her. He had to prove he was the alpha. "Fine," Halloway hissed, his voice trembling with suppressed fury. "You want to play lawyer? Let's play lawyer. You want to talk about the file? Let's talk about the file." He grabbed the stack of papers in front of him. "You are accused of stealing source code from Veritech. The prosecution alleges you were found with the data on an encrypted drive in your apartment. Truth or lie, Miss Williams, you possessed the drive." "Truth," Tiana said instantly. "Aha!" Halloway grinned, looking at the gallery as if he'd just won the lottery. "She admits it. She admits possession of stolen property." "I admitted possession of the drive," Tiana corrected him, her voice cool water against his fire. "I did not admit the property was stolen. You cannot steal what you created." "You created Veritech's proprietary banking algorithm?" Caldwell interjected, laughing derisively. "Your Honor, this is absurd. Veritech employs 300 PhDs. Miss Williams has let me check, a GED. "I have a GED, Tiana nodded, "and a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics from MIT, obtained online at age 16, and a Juris Doctorate from Yale Law, where I graduated summa cum laude 2 years ago. I just haven't taken the Illinois bar exam yet, because I've been busy building my own tech startup." Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. Caldwell looked at his papers. He flipped through them frantically. I don't see any of this in the background check." "That's because you ran a background check on Tiana Williams from Inglewood with a birth date of July 4th, 1999, Tiana said. "Common name, common mistake. You pulled the record of a Tiana Williams who has a shoplifting charge in 2018. My middle name is Marie, and I have never been arrested in my life until you dragged me out of my lab 3 days ago." She turned to the judge. "So, Judge Halloway, truth or lie? Did you and the prosecutor fail to perform basic due diligence before dragging a citizen into court, violating my Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable seizure based on a warrant with the wrong identity?" Halloway looked at Caldwell. Caldwell looked at Halloway. The judge's arrogance was beginning to crack, replaced by the dawning horror that he was standing on a landmine. But Halloway was a narcissist. He couldn't back down. Not now. "You're lying," Halloway snarled. "Yale Law? You? If you were a legal genius, you wouldn't be dressed like a janitor. You're a fraud, and I'm going to prove it." He leaned over the bench, his eyes narrowing into slits. "I'm setting bail at $5 million. Cash." The gallery gasped. $5 million was unheard of for a non-violent crime. It was a ransom, not bail. "And," Halloway added, a cruel smile returning, "if you are truly a lawyer, you'll know that you can appeal. But you'll sit in Cook County Jail for 6 months waiting for a hearing. By then, whatever startup you have will be dust." He raised his gavel. "Wait," Tiana said. She didn't shout, but the command in her voice stopped the gavel in midair. She reached into a notebook and pulled out a small, black device. It wasn't a phone. It was a digital audio recorder. The red light was blinking. "What is that?" Halloway demanded. "Electronics are prohibited in my courtroom." "Except for pro se litigants who require them to prepare their defense, as per Rule 44, Tiana said fast. "But that's not the point. The point is what's on this recorder." She held it up. "You see, Judge, I didn't just write the code for Veritech. I wrote a subroutine that tracks who accesses the code. And 3 days before I was arrested, my code was accessed by a private IP address. An IP address registered to a residential home in Highland Park." Halloway went pale. Highland Park was where he lived. "And," Tiana continued, her voice rising for the first time, ringing off the walls like a bell. That same IP address sent an email to the district attorney's office recommending they look into Tiana Williams. The email was signed, The Hammer. Tiana took a step closer to the bench. The bailiff stepped aside, sensing the power shift. "Truth or lie, Bianca?" Tiana said, dropping the Your Honor entirely. "You own stock in Veritech's competitor, don't you? And you needed my patent invalid so your portfolio wouldn't tank. You didn't just judge this case. You orchestrated it." Caldwell dropped his pen. It clattered loudly on the floor. Halloway stood up, his robes billowing. "Bailiff, seize that recorder. Seize her." "Touch me," Tiana said, "and the live stream on my phone, which has been broadcasting to 60,000 people for the last 10 minutes, will see you assault a defendant." She pointed to her hoodie pocket. A tiny camera lens, pinned to the fabric like a button, stared unblinking at the judge. "We're live, Judge." Tiana smiled, and it was the sharpest thing in the room. "Say hello to the internet. They're playing Truth or Lie in the comments right now. And guess what? They think you're lying." The silence in courtroom 402 was shattered not by a gavel, but by the buzzing of phones. It started in the back row. A young law student's pocket vibrated against the wooden bench, then another. Then the court reporter's cell, tucked inside her purse, lit up. The live stream wasn't just active, it was viral. The algorithm, Tiana's algorithm, had pushed the feed to the front page of every major platform in Chicago within minutes. "Turn it off!" Halloway screamed, losing his composure entirely. He stood up, his black robes looking less like regal vestments and more like the wings of a trapped bat. "Bailiff, destroy that device. This is a federal offense." The bailiff, a burly man named Officer Miller, who had worked in the Daly Center for 15 years, took a step toward Tiana. Tiana didn't flinch. She simply turned her head to look Miller in the eye. "Officer Miller," she said, her voice calm and remarkably gentle. "You have a pension. You have 2 daughters at Whitney Young High School. If you touch me, an innocent woman exposing a felony in progress, while 60,000 people are watching, you will lose your badge. You will lose your pension, and you will be named as a co-conspirator in a RICO case against Judge Halloway." Miller froze. His hand hovered over his belt. He looked at the furious judge, then back at the small girl in the hoodie who knew where his children went to school. He took a step back. I can't do that, Your Honor. She's right. If she's streaming, it's evidence." "You traitor!" Halloway roared. He looked frantically at the prosecutor. "Caldwell, do something! Object! Cite a precedent!" David Caldwell was pale. He was looking at his own phone, scrolling through the comments on the stream. "Is that Judge Halloway, the guy who locked up my brother?" "I know that prosecutor. He defended the chemical plant that poisoned the water in Cicero." "Free Tiana is trending #1 worldwide." Caldwell slowly closed his laptop. He was a shark, yes, but sharks know when there is blood in the water. And this time it was his own. "Your Honor," Caldwell said, his voice trembling slightly, "if the defendant has evidence of judicial misconduct, the state cannot in good conscience proceed with the bail hearing until these allegations are investigated." "Investigated?" Halloway's voice cracked. "I am the investigation. I am the law in this room." "Not anymore," Tiana said. She walked over to the prosecutor's table and picked up a heavy stack of documents Caldwell had brought. She dropped them on the floor with a loud thud. "Let's play another round, Bianca," Tiana said, stepping into the center of the well. The camera on her chest tracked her movement. "Truth or lie?" She pointed a finger at him. "Truth or lie? Last month, on October 14th, You met with the CEO of Apex Dynamics, Veritech's main competitor, at the Gibson's Steakhouse on Rush Street. You paid in cash, but your driver used a credit card to park the car. A car registered to the county. Halloway's eyes bulged. That's circumstantial. I have dinner with many people. Lie, Tiana snapped. Because I have the audio from that dinner. You didn't just eat steak, Bianca. You discussed a problem named Tiana Williams, who had created a code that would make Apex's new software obsolete. You were paid $200,000 in cryptocurrency to ensure I was buried in the system so my patent would expire. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her back pocket. Transaction ID, WA47. Shall I read the rest? It traces directly to a wallet on your iPad. The one sitting right there on your bench. Halloway instinctively covered his iPad with his hands. It was the guiltiest move he could have made. You hacked me, Halloway whispered, horror dawning on him. I didn't hack you, Tiana said, leaning in. You connected to the courthouse Wi-Fi, the same Wi-Fi that I, as a taxpayer, help fund. I just monitored the traffic. It's called packet sniffing. It's basic kid stuff, Bianca. If you're going to be a criminal, at least be a smart one. The courtroom doors banged open. Usually this would be a late arrival or a clerk, but the rhythm was wrong. It was too fast, too heavy. Halloway looked up, hoping for salvation. Tiana didn't look back. She knew who it was. 2 men in dark suits walked in, followed by 4 state troopers in full uniform. The lead suit wasn't a nobody. It was Marcus Thorne, the deputy director of the FBI's Chicago field office. The air in the room didn't just cool down, it evaporated. Thorne was a legend in Chicago. He was the man who had taken down the corrupt alderman syndicate 2 years prior. He didn't do traffic court. What is the meaning of this? Halloway shouted, though his voice lacked its usual thunder. Director Thorne, I am in the middle of a proceeding. Thorne walked past the bar, ignoring the bailiff, ignoring Caldwell. He stopped in front of Tiana. For a second, the room thought he was there to arrest her. Halloway smirked, a desperate, hope-filled grimace. Yes, the feds. She admitted to hacking. Thorne looked at Tiana. He nodded, a barely perceptible dip of his chin. Agent Williams, Thorne said. Are we secure? Agent? Halloway choked out the word. Tiana reached up and unzipped her hoodie. Underneath, she wasn't wearing a t-shirt. She was wearing a wire, and clipped to her belt, previously hidden by the baggy fabric, was a gold badge. We are secure, Director, Tiana said, her voice shifting. Gone was the hoodie girl persona. Gone was the scared defendant. This was the voice of authority. We have the confession on the live stream, the financial trace confirmed, and the prosecutor's complicity recorded. She turned to Halloway. The look on her face wasn't anger. It was pity. Truth or lie, Bianca, Tiana said softly. You thought you were playing a game with a defenseless girl from the projects, but the truth is, this entire arrest was a sting operation, and you swallowed the bait whole. Halloway slumped back into his chair. He looked small. The granite statue had crumbled into dust. I, Halloway stammered. Judge Bianca P. Halloway, Thorne announced, his voice booming to the back rows. You are under arrest for racketeering, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit judicial misconduct, and acceptance of bribes. Please step down from the bench. No, Halloway whispered. He clutched the gavel. This is my court. You can't. Step down, Tiana said, or we will drag you down. Halloway looked at the bailiff. Officer Miller looked at the ceiling, whistling silently. He looked at Caldwell. The prosecutor was already talking to one of the state troopers, hands raised, undoubtedly cutting a deal to save his own skin. Slowly, painfully, Bianca Holloway stood up. His legs shook. He descended the 3 steps from the high bench to the floor level. For the first time in 20 years, he was on the same level as the people he judged. As he reached the bottom step, Tiana was waiting. She held out a pair of handcuffs. "I think these belong to you," she said. "You can't do this," Holloway hissed, tears of rage welling in his eyes. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes," Tiana said, snapping the cuffs onto his wrists. The metal clicked, a sound louder than any gavel. "You're docket number 4493. Now look at me." She waited until he raised his eyes. "Truth or lie? You have the right to remain silent." Holloway didn't answer. He couldn't. "Truth," Tiana answered for him. "I suggest you use it." As the troopers led Holloway away, the courtroom erupted, not with chaos, but with applause. The people in the back, the mothers of sons he had wrongly incarcerated, the defendants waiting for their turn in the meat grinder, started to clap. It wasn't a polite golf clap. It was a roar of liberation. Thorne turned to Tiana. "Good work, Williams. The feed?" "Cut it," Tiana said. She tapped her phone, but she didn't cut it. Not yet. She looked into the camera lens one last time. "To everyone watching," she said to the millions now tuned in, "the system is broken only if we let it be. My name is Tiana Marie Williams. I'm not just a coder. I'm a federal agent with the Cyber Crimes Division. And today, the hangman got hung." She tapped the screen. Blackout. But the story wasn't over. Karma has a way of echoing, and for Bianca Holloway, the nightmare was just beginning. He wasn't going to a federal country club prison. Tiana had made sure of one specific detail in the warrant. He was being remanded to Cook County Jail, the same jail he had filled with thousands of angry, innocent men. The transport van from the Daly Center to the Cook County Department of Corrections, colloquially known as 26th and Cal, was not designed for comfort. It was a steel box bolted to a truck chassis, devoid of windows, smelling of old vomit, industrial disinfectant, and fear. Judge Bianca Holloway sat on a narrow metal bench, his wrists handcuffed to a waist chain. Every time the van hit a pothole on the Dan Ryan Expressway, the metal bit into his skin. He was a man accustomed to the plush leather of a chauffeured Lincoln Town car. Now, he was bouncing shoulder to shoulder with a man coming down from a violent PCP high and another who sat in a catatonic stupor, staring at Holloway's Italian shoes. "I am a judge," Holloway muttered, mostly to himself. "This is a mistake. I need to speak to the warden." The man on the PCP come-down twitched, turning a bloodshot eye toward him. "You ain't no judge in here, old man. In here, you just meet." The van lurched to a halt. The back doors flew open, letting in the blinding grey light of a Chicago afternoon and the barking of dogs. "Out! Everyone out! Movement!" Holloway stumbled out, his legs stiff. He looked up at the fortress of concrete and razor wire. He had sentenced thousands of men to this place. He had signed the papers with a flourish of his expensive fountain pen, never once thinking about what happened after the ink dried. Now, the building loomed over him like a tombstone. The processing. The intake center was a sensory assault. It was loud, chaotic, and aggressively dehumanizing. Holloway was herded into a holding pen with 30 other men. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and the metallic tang of adrenaline. "Name!" A corrections officer barked from behind a plexiglass shield. He didn't look up. "Judge Bianca P. Holloway," Bianca said, trying to summon the thunderous voice he used in courtroom 402. "I demand to be placed in protective custody immediately. I am a high-profile target." The officer looked up. He chewed his gum slowly. He recognized the judge. Everyone did. Holloway was legendary for denying bail to corrections officers' family members just to prove a point. "Holloway," the officer said, typing slowly. "System says inmate 29340. We don't have a judge listed here. Strip." "Excuse me?" "Strip. Everything. Suit, tie, underwear. In the bin. Now." Holloway stood frozen. The humiliation was physical. With trembling hands, he undid the silk tie, a gift from the mayor. He unbuttoned the bespoke shirt. He stepped out of the $3,000 trousers. As he stood naked on the cold tile floor, shivering, he felt the last shred of his power evaporate. He was just a pale, soft, aging man with knobby knees. The officer blasted him with a delousing spray that burned his eyes and smelled of sulfur. Then a bundle of fabric was thrown at his face. "Get dressed. Tan scrubs. Size large." The uniform was stiff, scratching his skin like sandpaper. It carried the faint, indelible odor of the hundreds of men who had worn it before him, the smell of sweat and despair. "Division 11, the officer announced, handing him a plastic bag containing a toothbrush, a comb, and a bar of soap. Holloway's blood ran cold. "Division 11? That's maximum security. That's the violent ward. You can't put me there. I'm a white-collar defendant." "Division 11 is the only deck with a bed open," the officer said with a cruel smirk. "Overcrowding, you know. Maybe you should have signed fewer remand orders, Judge. Move." The descent. The walk to Division 11 took 10 minutes. It felt like 10 years. They passed through a labyrinth of hallways, each one sealed by a heavy steel door that slammed shut with a finality that echoed in Holloway's ribcage. Clang, clang, clang. As they approached the deck, the noise changed. It wasn't just administrative bustle anymore. It was a roar, the sound of 60 men shouting, banging on tables, and the blare of a television turned up to maximum volume. The guard unlocked the gate. "Fresh fish on the deck!" Holloway was shoved inside. The door slid shut behind him. The common room was a concrete box painted a depressing shade of institutional beige. Steel tables were bolted to the floor. In the center, a group of men were playing spades, slamming cards down with violent force. The noise didn't stop, but the attention shifted. The predatory instinct of the yard is faster than light. 60 pairs of eyes turned to the door. They saw the silver hair. They saw the soft hands. They saw the terror. Holloway, clutching his plastic bag to his chest like a shield, tried to make himself invisible. He scuttled toward an empty corner near the phones. "Yo!" A deep voice boomed from the upper tier. "Turn up the TV! It's on!" High on the wall, behind a protective cage, the evening news was playing. The chyron read, "Breaking, the hangman arrested." The footage showed Tiana Williams, the girl in the hoodie, standing over Holloway in the courtroom. It showed the fear in his eyes. It showed the handcuffs snapping onto his wrists. The room erupted. It wasn't anger, it was raucous, howling laughter. It was the sound of the oppressed watching the oppressor fall. "That's him!" A man with face tattoos shouted, pointing a finger at Holloway. "That's the hangman! That's the expletive and who gave me 20 years!" Holloway backed into the wall. "Please," he whispered. "I have money. I can make calls." The circle closed in. 5 men. Then 10. Then 20. They didn't touch him yet. They just surrounded him, cutting off the air, cutting off the light. Then the crowd parted. A young man walked through the center of the circle. He wasn't the biggest man in the room, but he carried himself with a dangerous, kinetic energy. It was Jerome Baker, the 19-year-old boy Holloway had mocked just hours ago, the boy whose life Holloway had tossed aside like garbage because he wanted to play a game. Jerome stopped 3 feet from Holloway. He looked different. The fear that had paralyzed him in the courtroom was gone, replaced by the hard, cold survival instinct of the Cook County Jail. "Well, well," Jerome said, his voice quiet but cutting through the noise. "Look what the cat dragged in." "Mr. Baker," Holloway stammered, his voice cracking into a high-pitched squeak. "Jerome, listen to me. I can help you. I know the district attorney. I can get your charges dropped. I can get you out of here." Jerome laughed. It was a bitter, jagged sound. "You can't even get yourself out of here, Bianca. You ain't got no gavel now. You ain't got no robe. You just a number. Same as me." Jerome took a step closer. The other inmates watched, grinning. This was better than TV. "You like games, right?" Jerome asked, tilting his head. "That's your thing. You like to play with people's lives." Holloway pressed his back against the cold concrete. "No, please. Let's play," Jerome snapped. He slammed his hand against the wall next to Holloway's head. Holloway flinched, squeezing his eyes shut. "Truth or lie?" Jerome whispered, his breath hot on Holloway's face. "You scared right now?" Holloway opened his eyes. He looked at Jerome. He looked at the circle of men who wanted him dead. "Truth," Holloway wept. "I'm scared. Please." "Good," Jerome said. "Now you know how I felt when you looked at me and called me a liar. You know how my mama felt when you set that bail." Jerome reached out and grabbed Holloway's plastic commissary bag. "Hey!" Holloway instinctively tightened his grip. Jerome yanked it away with a violent jerk, ripping the plastic. The soap and toothbrush clattered to the floor. Jerome held up the single packet of honey bun cookies, the only comfort food given to new arrivals. "This is tax," Jerome said, holding the cookies up like a trophy. "For my lost wages, for the job I lost today because of you." He tossed the bag to the man with the face tattoos. "Distribute that." Jerome leaned in close again. "You're in my house now, Judge. You sleep when we say you sleep. You eat when we say you eat. And if you ever try to lie to us." He let the threat hang in the air. "Welcome to the Thunderdome." The long night. The lights in Division 11 never truly turned off. They just dimmed to a sickly, buzzing yellow. Holloway lay on the bottom bunk of his cell. The mattress was 2 inches thick and smelled of mildew. He had no pillow. He had no blanket. Someone had snatched it while he was in the bathroom. The sounds of the jail at night were terrified him. The screaming, the flushing of toilets, the whispers of conspiracies. He curled into a fetal position, his knees pulled to his chest. He closed his eyes and tried to picture his study in Highland Park, the mahogany desk, the smell of old books and expensive scotch. But the image wouldn't hold. Instead, all he could see was Tiana Williams's face, her calm, mathematical stare. The way she had dissected his life with a few lines of code. He realized then that Tiana hadn't just put him in prison. She had put him in hell. And as the shadows stretched across the concrete floor, Bianca Holloway, the hangman of Cook County, began to sob into his hands. From the top bunk, a voice drifted down. "Shut up, fresh fish, or I'll come down there and shut you up." Holloway swallowed his sobs, choking on the silence. It was going to be a very, very long night. 3 months later, the snow had melted in Chicago, revealing the grime and the gold of the city beneath. But inside the Federal Dirksen building, the atmosphere was sterile, cold, and electric. This wasn't traffic court. This wasn't the county circuit where Holloway had ruled like a petty king. This was federal court. The wood paneling was darker, the seal on the wall was larger, and the stakes were absolute. Bianca Holloway sat at the defense table. He looked like a ghost of the man he had been. The silver hair, once perfectly coiffed, was thinning and unwashed. He wore a standard-issue orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame, which had withered from stress and the terrifying, sleepless nights in protective custody. He wasn't shackled. Federal procedure was different during plea talks, but his hands trembled so violently he had to keep them clasped in his lap. Opposite him sat David Caldwell, his former prosecutor, who had turned state's evidence faster than a rat fleeing a sinking ship. And next to Caldwell sat Tiana Williams. She didn't look like the hoodie girl from the viral video. She wore a sharp charcoal pantsuit, her hair braided into an elegant crown. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like the executioner. We are here to discuss the plea agreement for United States versus Bianca P. Holloway, the federal mediator announced. The charges are RICO conspiracy, 14 counts of wire fraud, 6 counts of judicial misconduct, and deprivation of civil rights under color of law. Holloway's lawyer, a high-priced fixer named Sterling, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, leaned forward. My client is prepared to plead guilty to the fraud charges. In exchange, we ask for a 10-year sentence, serving in a minimum security facility in Florida. He is an old man. He has health issues. Tiana didn't speak. She just opened her laptop. The sound of the screen unlatching was like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Mr. Sterling," Tiana said, her voice low and smooth, "your client isn't just a fraudster. He is an architect of systemic oppression. Florida is off the table. Minimum security is off the table." Holloway looked up, his eyes bloodshot. You ruined me," he rasped. "I was a pillar of this city. I kept the streets safe. You think you're a hero? You're just a hacker with a badge." Tiana smiled. It was the smile of someone holding a royal flush. "Let's play one last game, Bianca," she said. "Truth or lie?" Holloway flinched at the phrase. "Truth or lie? You claim you have health issues that require a soft facility. But according to the encrypted health logs from your Apple Watch, which, by the way, syncs to the same iCloud account you use to take bribes, your resting heart rate is that of an athlete, and you played 18 holes of golf the day before your arrest." She turned the laptop screen around. Graphs, charts, and location data were displayed in high definition. "I have mapped your entire life, Bianca," Tiana continued, her voice hardening. "I know about the offshore accounts in the Caymans. I know about the consulting fees paid to your wife's shell company by private prison contractors. You didn't just sentence men to jail, you sold them. You received kickbacks for every year you added to a sentence. That's human trafficking." The room went deathly silent. Even Sterling looked shocked. This was new evidence. That's admissible?" Sterling stammered. "It is when it's obtained via a FISA warrant, which Director Thorne authorized 3 months ago," Tiana said. She leaned over the table, locking eyes with Holloway. "So here is the counteroffer. You plead guilty to all counts. You surrender all assets, the house in Highland Park, the cars, the Cayman accounts. All of it goes into a restitution fund for your victims, and you accept a sentence of 25 years. 25? Holloway screamed, standing up. "I'll be 85. I'll die in there." "Jerome Baker was 19 when you sent him away for a crime he didn't commit," Tiana shot back, her composure breaking just enough to show the fire underneath. "He lost his job. He lost his apartment. He almost lost his mind. You didn't care about his life expectancy. Why should I care about yours?" She stood up, towering over him despite her small stature. "Take the deal, Bianca, or I take this to trial. And if I take it to trial, I will put every single mother whose son you sold on the stand. I will make sure the jury hears them cry. And you won't get 25 years. You'll get life." Holloway looked at his lawyer. Sterling closed his folder. "Take the deal, Bianca. She's not bluffing. She's smarter than you. She's smarter than all of us." Holloway slumped back into his chair. He looked at the federal seal on the wall. The eagle seemed to be glaring at him. "I take it," he whispered. The sentencing. 2 weeks later, the sentencing hearing became the most watched event in Chicago history. The courtroom was packed. The gallery was a sea of faces, mostly black and brown, mostly working class, people who had lived in fear of the hangman for decades. When Judge Holloway was led in, the silence was heavy, suffocating. He walked with a shuffle now. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a terrified hollowness. Federal Judge Marilyn K. Black presided. She was a woman known for her fairness and her distaste for corruption. "Bianca P. Holloway," Judge Black said, looking down from the bench. "You were entrusted with the most sacred duty of our democracy, the administration of justice. You turned that duty into a commodity. You treated human beings like inventory." She paused, adjusting her glasses. "I have read the victim impact statements. There are 3,000 of them. 3,000 lives interrupted, derailed, or destroyed by your greed." She looked at Tiana, who sat in the front row next to Jerome Baker. Jerome was clean-shaven, wearing a suit Tiana had bought him. He held his head high. "Miss Williams," Judge Black said. "Would you like to speak?" Tiana stood up. She walked to the podium. She didn't need notes. "Your Honor," Tiana began, "when I stood in this man's court 6 months ago, he called me a little girl from Englewood. He thought my zip code defined my intelligence. He thought my hoodie defined my worth. He was wrong." She turned to face the gallery, then turned back to Holloway. "But the tragedy isn't that he underestimated me. The tragedy is that he underestimated everyone he sentenced. How many engineers, doctors, artists, or fathers were lost in those cells because it was profitable for him? We will never know. But we know this. Intelligence is not a privilege of the rich. Justice is not a toy for the powerful. And today, the truth isn't just a game. It's the verdict." "Amen," someone shouted from the back. The gavel didn't bang. Judge Black let it stand. "Bianca Holloway," Judge Black pronounced, "I sentence you to 25 years in the Federal Correctional Institution at Terre Haute. You are designated to the general population. You will receive no special protection status. May God have mercy on your soul, because the law has none left for you." The bang of the gavel was the sound of an era ending. As the marshals hauled Holloway away, he looked back one last time. He looked for Tiana. But she wasn't looking at him. She was looking at Jerome. She was looking at the future. He had already been deleted from her code. The hard karma. The transfer to Terre Haute was brutal. The soft prison Holloway had dreamed of, the kind with tennis courts and libraries, was a fantasy. Terre Haute was hard time. When Holloway arrived, stripped of his name and reduced to inmate Danoorpahanker 89402, he was marched into Unit D. The noise was deafening. It was a cacophony of shouting, metal clanging, and the aggressive posturing of men who had nothing left to lose. He was assigned a bottom bunk in a cell with a man named Ice. Ice was 6'4", serving life for racketeering, ironically, a charge similar to Holloway's, but committed on the streets, not from a bench. "You the judge?" Ice asked that first night, staring down from the top bunk. Holloway pulled his thin blanket up to his chin. I was. Ice laughed. It was a dry, rattling sound. "Funny. My cousin went through your court, said you gave him 10 years for a bag of weed, said you didn't even look him in the eye." Holloway said nothing. He stared at the concrete wall. "Well," Ice said, turning over, "you're going to have a lot of time to look people in the eye in here. "You ain't the hammer no more, Judge. You the nail." That night, Halloway cried. But nobody came. There was no bailiff to silence the noise. There was no gavel to command respect. There was only the cold, hard truth of the cage he had built for others, now closing in on him. The Truth Initiative. 6 months later, the old community centre on 63rd Street in Englewood had been transformed. The peeling paint was gone, replaced by a vibrant mural of Lady Justice. But in this mural, she wasn't blindfolded. She was wearing glasses and typing on a laptop. She looked like Tiana. Above the doors, a sleek, modern sign read, "The Truth Initiative, Legal Defense and Coding Academy." Inside, the hum of servers and the clacking of keyboards filled the air. 50 students, ranging from age 16 to 30, sat at dual-monitor workstations. They were learning Python, Solidity, and constitutional law simultaneously. Tiana walked through the rows. She stopped at a desk where Jerome Baker was working. He was staring intently at lines of code on his screen. "Stuck?" Tiana asked, resting a hand on his shoulder. Jerome looked up, grinning. "Nah, just debugging the crawler. I found a pattern in the sentencing data from the 4th District. It looks like Judge Reeves is auto-denying bail for anyone with a specific zip code, just like Halloway did." "Good catch," Tiana said, her eyes gleaming. "Flag it. We'll file the motion tomorrow." "We gonna take him down, too?" Jerome asked. "We're going to take them all down," Tiana corrected him. "Or we're going to make them play fair. Either way, we win." She walked to the front of the room. The chatter died down. These kids looked at her not just as a teacher, but as a savior, a proof of concept that they could be more than what society told them they were. "Listen up," Tiana called out. "Director Thorne from the FBI just called. He wants to offer internships to the top 3 students in this class for their cyber division next summer." A cheer erupted, hoots, hollers, and high fives. These were kids who had been told they would be lucky to work fast food. Now the FBI was knocking on their door. "But," Tiana said, raising a finger, "remember the rule. Intelligence is a weapon. You don't use it to bully. You don't use it to cheat. You use it to find the truth. Because what happens when you lie? You get caught," the class shouted in unison. "And what happens when you tell the truth? You get free." Tiana smiled. It was a real smile, one that reached her eyes. She had won the game. But more importantly, she had changed the rules forever. Later that night, Tiana sat alone in her office at the back of the center. The city lights of Chicago twinkled outside her window. She opened her terminal. She wasn't hacking a bank or a government server. She was writing the final entry in her personal journal, which she kept encrypted on her private drive. She typed, "Status, case closed. Subject, Halloway. Outcome, justice served. Lesson. The smartest person in the room isn't usually the one shouting. It's the one listening." She closed the laptop. She picked up her phone and saw a notification, a news alert. Former Judge Halloway hospitalized after prison altercation. She swiped the notification away without reading the details. Karma was handling that file now. She had work to do. She grabbed her bag, turned off the lights, and walked out into the cool Chicago night. The air tasted sweet. It tasted like victory. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the full story of how Tiana Williams turned the tables on the most corrupt judge in Chicago. She didn't use a gun, and she didn't use fists. She used her mind. She proved that in the information age, the most dangerous person in the room is the one who knows the code. Halloway is rotting in a cell of his own making, and Tiana is building a future where no one has to fear the gavel just because of where they come from. If you enjoyed this story of high IQ justice and brutal karma, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And I want to know, do you think 25 years was enough for Holloway, or should he have gotten life? Let me know your verdict in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. I've got another story coming next week about a CEO who tried to frame his janitor, unaware the janitor was an ex-CIA operative. You don't want to miss it. Stay sharp, stay safe, and always tell the truth.